So create a ripe opportunity for someone to come in and price below them. This is not simple. And in fact, with most startups, this is the thing where people get blindsided, is the culture, the ecosystem. You do not stand alone. There are other people within the ecosystem which you operate within. And you got to be very cognizant of it. In college education, it's pretty complex. There's all these different players there. And if you say, well, I'm just going to be better than everyone else, and I'm going to do this on my own, you're not paying attention to the interdependencies that really exist within the market. And what will happen is they'll cut you off at the knees. And whether you can say that's illegal or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's what will happen. So in the case of Chegg, they created partnerships and going to some schools and actually have kiosks in the bookstores in which they rent books. They work very closely with the publishers and giving them kickbacks on the profits we make to make sure they're happy and they supply us books. We're working on the professors, but I was working with the the provost here, Terry, before she left, and I haven't really been successful kind of starting that back up, but we're working with professors to let them know this is a good thing for their students. The people who are kind of most upset, of course, distributors and wholesalers, but you can't make everyone happy, remember. You're not going to make everyone happy. What is the expertise in renting books? You probably say, well, anybody could do that. Well, you think of Amazon, right? Amazon takes product out of a warehouse and ship it one direction. Chegg has to not only ship it, but then bring it back and catalog it to go and send it out again. It's very complex, actually, the logistics around that. And we brought in the person who ran all logistics for the Army for Afghanistan to help run this for us, because it's very complex modeling. Additionally, data mining. If you go rent the wrong books, you're going to screw up your margins. Like, you can't go rent the classical novel in paperback. I mean, you're never going to make a buck. It's much cheaper for the student to go and rent, or excuse me, to buy that used. So value creation is disruptive innovation plus the 3 circles around creative destruction. And that's what we created at Chegg. They have nonlinear growth in terms of book rentals and in revenue. Here it says the 150 going to 330. I'm going to try to hold management to those numbers, but they're doing actually very, very well. So what's the opportunities for EECS? Innovation is here and thriving in a big way. And EECS is the leader in the College of Engineering. And you should be proud of that. 40 to 50% of the patents that are being issued out of the College of Engineering come out of EECS. That's highly disproportionate given that there's 13 schools. So I think like we should get extra merit awards or extra awards, extra money from the dean. I think it should be a disproportionate amount of allocation of resources for the disproportionate amount of productivity. And then invention disclosures. Likewise, they are the leaders in disclosures at the university. So there is no shortage at all of invention. And what about what happens? I mean, with all this invention, is there anything coming out of it? Well, I would say that there's more invention, that there's actually disruptive technologies because of all the spin-outs that are coming out of EECS. And you should be pretty proud. I don't think engineers necessarily do a big job of marketing or tooting their own horn, but I think it's really important for you to collaborate with one another and learn from one another about what these kind of companies did well and why they were successful. And some of the founders of these companies are around you today. So the other thing is you say, well, some of these companies are just local, and what about the bigger companies? You guys in Silicon Valley are creating these other companies, and what about them? What about EECS's influence there? Google, Sun, and DoubleClick, huge perennial companies that not only created equity value for shareholders, but totally transformed a market, were founded by EECS students, or former students. That's amazing. I mean, amazing. You look across the country, I don't think a lot of schools can claim that, that kind of impact. And so you should be very proud, but you also should learn and model from their success and understand how they did it. And just a quick anecdote, because I know the professor mentor at Stanford who used to mentor a lot of the graduate PhD students, and he was a good friend of mine, who mentored the boys at Google. And actually the problem they were first trying to solve was one that was impossible, but he didn't bother to tell them that. He asked them to take, because he realized they had a lot of passion and that they were onto something. And he had a lot of understanding about where the technology could go, but it needed to be developed more. So he encouraged them. And he was a facilitator and mentor, and they developed the technology. And at one point, he started asking them different questions that led their research and work to move to a different approach and a different application for search. And I think that's what happens with a lot of great innovation, a lot of great startups with value creation, is they go through a lot of iterations. They overcome, because they don't look at it as failure, they look at experimentation. They look at it the scientific method. And they keep asking the questions and keep experimenting. And I think that is what creates a lot of value. So the question is, what's stopping you? You know, I was surprised to see the data here. You look back at the master's and doctorates degrees, and it's pretty steady. You can see some blip, basically shortly after the dot-com bubble. But if you look at undergraduate degrees, it's waning, especially in EE, where Larry and I got our degrees. And it begged me the question, is there an issue that people think, well, all this stuff is being done in Silicon Valley? Is the question that, it's all China and India now? Help me understand, why would there be a reduction in the enthusiasm getting degrees in EE or CE? Does anyone have an idea? Think there's bigger problems to solve?
I think there's a lack of fundamentals taught in math and science in high school, and that discourages a lot of kids when they come to college to pursue technical degrees.
That's pretty fundamental. I think that, oops, there we go again. You would hope that our political leaders would be able to do something about that fundamental problem. But for me, I don't see an environment and more of need of the skill set of EECS than there is today. And I don't see the opportunity set any bigger than it's ever been than it is today. So I think you're really privileged to be in this position, and I encourage you to use the skills and the specialized knowledge you have here to develop expertise. And I think there's an opportunity for that, and I'm going to go over it right now. One thing I had heard is that some students might believe, well, there's bigger issues like energy issues to solve or healthcare issues to solve. And as I gave you that kind of example with respect to me taking fault-tolerant design techniques into a communications environment, I think some of the best opportunities is when you have specialized knowledge and expertise, applying it to an application or an environment that other people define the problem. So with your skill set, there is all these problems out there to solve. Big, big problems. In bioengineering, healthcare, security, energy, all of them requiring a lot of skill set in EECS. Because of limited time, I'm just going to focus on one. I could spend 20 minutes just on this slide. There are some scary statistics out there around our environment because of CO2 emissions, because of fossil fuels that we use and depend upon. Not to mention the geopolitical risk that exists that affects us and will affect our children. What are we doing about it? You say, well, that's not my problem. There's politicians there. And how can I solve that? I'm not a chemical engineer. And, what about all these alternative energies? You talked about algae before. Won't that solve it? What about windmills? What about solar? You know what the number one thing we can do to solve our energy problem in the short term? Use less. That's right. That deserves 2 books. I'll give them to your friends. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, 57% of the energy that is consumed is wasted. Wasted. If we could provide, with technology and the answers that we have, an EECS, to figure out how to, first of all, monitor it, and then maybe do some proper allocation of costs, incorporating costs of the environment. And maybe that's not in the real pricing, but if we make people aware of what those costs are and what the prices should be, that will influence people, influence their behaviors. And who can develop those kind of technologies and controls of the electrical grid system? You guys. That's who can do it. And this is a big problem. It's an immediate problem. And whoever solves the top 20 problems in it are all going to be billionaires. Look how big the market is, 1.2 trillion. That's a big market. There is plenty of problems to solve, and that's just energy. So I would challenge you to come up with an area that you can apply this framework and do some creative destruction. And so with that, I'm going to throw down a big, big, big challenge right now, and the reward will be worth it. So I want to know who here today would like to take the challenge of using this framework to solve a very, very big problem they're passionate about. Raise your hand. Anyone? Okay. Okay. All those people who raise their hand, who would like to have a pair of tickets to the game tomorrow on the 50-yard line? Okay. And of those people who raise their hand, I'm going to give a pair of tickets away to the 50-yard line to the first of those people who raise their hand who are willing to commit to doing it, and then come back and talk to the dean and talk to Khalil about your progress in 4 months and 8 months and report back to them. And if you're willing to do that, the tickets are yours. Okay.
I'll do the project, but I have another.
That's kind of deflating, you know? Okay, then you have the opportunity. You can give them away to one of the students then. Anyone want them? Okay, let's hand them back. Okay. So this always grabbed me. There's a lot of things been written and said about Thomas Jefferson, but what he said about himself on his own tombstone, you know, amazingly didn't mention anything about him being President of the United States or some of his accomplishments. Instead, what he wrote about as his epitaph are things that he did for other people. And that's kind of powerful to me because it says this man had a lot of purpose, had a sense of purpose. And so, you know, to me, if you're going to do something that's a lot of value creation, you got to be doing it for the sake of not just yourself, but for others. And that's a powerful thing. You know, I very much appreciate the confidence that I gained here at the University of Michigan. It gave me the confidence to tackle big, big problems and not be afraid to go after them. It gave me a skill set. It gave me a skill set to have this intellectual discipline to synthesize huge complex data sets, which sometimes annoys other people when I do that. Because they say, why do you have to do it all? You know, because you want to know. You want to know what the most important variables are and what aren't. And it gave me this analytical rigor to really dissect and solve problems. And I'm very grateful. You know, I grew up in an area that, where, you know, I have a friend who, you know, works 3 jobs just to make ends meet. So, you know, we're blessed. We're blessed with a gift. And I appreciate it. So, you know, to me the challenge isn't, you know, because each and every one of us has gotten something special in our experience set. And I think the question becomes not what it's done for me, but I think the question is, what do we do for others? And so with that, I'll say, be leaders and best, and go blue.